Hey, JD here. Welcome to the Mead House. You know, over the past several years, we've brought you over 125 episodes of mead making, education, information, and entertainment. More than 80 guests have stopped by the Mead House. Professional mead makers, medal-winning home mead makers, competition organizers, experts on yeast and honey specialists have all visited to share their knowledge. The Mead House is produced for home mead makers and brewers looking for a bit of inspiration and information from the many guests and discussions we have here at the house. You can help support the Mead House by joining the Mead House Keyholder Club on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and search for the Mead House. There's also a link in the show notes. For as little as $2 a month, you can become a key holder. We've teamed up with some great companies to provide thank you gifts for your support. So get on over to Patreon, join the Mead House Keyholder Club, and get your own set of keys to the Mead House. Hey, you can listen to the Mead House podcast with your favorite player and be sure to rate us 5 stars on iTunes or your favorite listening venue. Mead House. Mead making entertainment you just don't want to miss. Welcome to the Mead House, and thanks for listening to episode number 143. God, these things just keep going up and up and up. You know where to find us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, iHeartRadio. There's just a whole mess of them out there. They're all listed on the front page of the website. Check us out, themeadhouse.com. Hey, the Mead House, it is produced for home mead makers and brewers just like you and me, looking for a bit of inspiration and information from the many guests. I'll tell you what, if you haven't picked up on what we've been laying down here at the Mead House, there's something wrong. We've had some fantastic people come on our show, home mead makers, people from the professional industry, you name it. If you haven't been taking notes, hey, that's your fault. But hey, we do have a lot going on here at the Mead House. Talk to us. We're on Facebook and Twitter, both at the Mead House. Or you can just email us at info@themeadhouse.com. Jeff and Ryan are both seated at the bar. I'm JD Webb. Hey, in segment 1, when college students lack the funds for enough alcohol for the weekend, you make it yourself. That was our guest's first experience. Then, a friend suggested he try making a mead, and like many of us, could have made a killing selling rocket fuel to NASA. But a few medals later, Paul Johnson would emerge as a contender for any mead competition. In segment 2 tonight, Jeff is experimenting again. Hang on to your hats, cowboy. This time it's in pasteurization. And it also, you know, there's more than one way to ferment a nice tasting adult beverage. We'll explore a couple of them here tonight at the Mead House. And of course, Facebook friends, this is where we try to answer questions with no formal expertise other than what we've experienced in our own brew room. So all that and more here at the Mead House. But first, say thanks to all the Mead House key holders who help keep the Mead House podcast free. You too can become a Mead House key holder and help support the show for as little as $2 a month. We've got some great thank you gifts to send to you. Get on over to patreon.com, search for the Mead House, or hey, do it the easy way. Click on the link in the show notes. What are we drinking tonight? Double fisting it in traditional Mead House fashion. I got this hard cider from I don't remember where I picked it up from. It's Smith Forge. I haven't had this one yet. Smith and Forge hard cider, and made strong. It says. The lights are really dim right here in my desk, so I can't even tell you what the ABV is. But it's rather tasty, not terribly sweet. It's definitely not a British cider. I'll tell you that right off the top. It's got it's got a very nice apple flavor to it, and it's got that little bit of tartness on the back end. The sweetness kind of hits you up front. This is a really refreshing cider. I would drink another bottle of this anytime. In my other fist tonight, you know I'm a bourbon guy, okay? There's a bourbon out there if you can find it. It's made by Old Forester, it's labeled Old Forester, but you got to find the 1910 version of this. Now there's like 1870, 1910, 1920. I think there's even a 1930 out there. Try to get see if you can get your hands on 1910. This is, you talk about brown sugar caramels. All of the traditional bourbon flavors are there. I would definitely soak a piece of wood in this and drop it in a traditional Old Forester 1910 if you can find it. That's what's in my other fist tonight. Jeff, you're always good for something and something tasty in your cup. What is it tonight?
So, Mead House fashion, I am double fisting it tonight. Glass number one is Wild Wild Bunny from Sap House Meadery. It's that Cascara and vanilla. Been kind of a coffee mead kick lately. So I saw this one was already open in my fridge and decided to pour myself a glass of it because it sounded good. And I love the vanilla and the kind of it's not a coffee note per se, but it's more of a kind of a coffee adjacent kind of fruity flavor. Really tasty and interesting. And then in the other glass, this is actually iteration, I think, 6 of the hibiscus meads that I've been making for my wife. And this is actually connected to what I'm going to be talking about in section 2. Because this is actually going to be my qualitative analysis for that whole pasteurization process. So I'll save my tasting notes for then.
Outstanding. Very good. Hey, Ryan, I know you got a lot going on there up there at Mead House North, but I know you've been digging through the old mead shelf there down there in the basement. And what did you pull out from the dust bins tonight?
Well, I found it's a mead that I've made a few times. So this is the kind of fruit salad, champagne carbonated, Brettanomyces, inoculated mead that I've got here. But I found one of the dusty old bottles of it. So, like second generation or maybe first generation. And it's drinking great. I mean, it's drinking delicious. It's gorgeous in color. I mean, it's just got this very pale pink color to it. Beautiful carbonation. You get lots of fresh fruit and Brett coming off the nose. I'm drinking it ice cold, or pretty much cold anyway. Which it's kind of mimicking how you drink a champagne with it. You drink that cold. So I like this one. It's kind of probably getting boring for some listeners to hear me talking about drinking about this one or drinking this one every third show. But hey, you find something you like and you ride it till you can't anymore.
There you go.
So we're gonna do that. I was at the Mall of America last weekend, and the Mall of America in Minneapolis, or just south of Minneapolis, is, I don't know if it still is. At the time it was the largest enclosed shopping mall in the world, and this thing has got a full-size amusement park in the middle of it. I mean,
yep.
Roller coasters and we call it like a drop tower and
yep.
and all kinds of rides. Like the ride, the pirate ship thing that goes upside down. All like full-size amusement park, just in the middle of this mall. Well, while the kids were checking out some rides and everything like that, I went over and I saw our old friend Michael from Worker Bee, and he's got a store at the mall, and I stopped in and I saw him, and he was there. I usually at the mall every once in a while, and I stop in. Usually he's not there, but he was this Friday night, and started talking to him. And he's got this honey bar. He's got all these different honeys on pumps. So he puts them on little tasting papers and gives it to you, and you try it. Well, he put 2 honeys in front of me to try that were just unbelievable. I'd never had anything like them before. I think they were both from California. One of them was a coriander honey. So, unbelievable. I mean, the flavors on it was intense. It was rich. It was unbelievably. He said it's very limited quantities that he was able to get. I mean, he's one of the major honey buyers of different little varieties. So unbelievable. The second one was chicory honey. Just unbelievable stuff. Just undescribable. I mean, I couldn't compare it to any other honey I've had. I mean, it was rich. It was fruity. It was bold. Just amazing honeys. And yet, to make a mead with those would be ridiculously expensive. I mean, it might cost you $30 a bottle or something, depending on what you're going to make by the time you're done.
Wow.
But hey, I mean, that's what Ken Schramm was saying to us. He's like, look, you want to make a carrot, blossom traditional? Go ahead. He goes, I can't buy enough of that to make it in my meadery, but you can, for a 5-gallon batch. And who cares if it's expensive? It's going to be good. So I don't know. It kind of got me thinking. And then I thought of our old buddy John Duncan over at the Micro Makers Group. They make their stuff a quart at a time,
right?
Or half gallon at a time, and you can do that. But I wanted to say that at the top of the show before I forgot about it, because you can find some absolutely amazing varietals that you want to try to play with that are
and you say
they're going to be expensive, but they're going to give you a little bit more than just trying the clover or the orange blossom or the mesquite or so. Those are all great honeys, but man, it got me thinking. Like I want to try to make a coriander traditional or a chicory traditional.
And you say they're from California,
like that,
And you say they're from California, right?
I believe that's what he said. I believe that, and Michael will be on the show again. I talked to Michael. I said, Michael, I got to get you back on the show. And he said, he had a really good time the last time he was here, and I think he's going to, he'd love to join us again.
Good.
But I believe he said the coriander was from California, and he thought the chicory was also from California. But it was, if you could get just a couple of pounds of each, and you could, make a really small batch, it'd be worth it. And I think that's what would be really interesting now, is start playing with some of those really wild honeys that you just get a pound or 3 of.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, as JD mentioned at the top of the show, our guest tonight is, he's no stranger to playing with some of the wild stuff. Paul Johnson, great mead maker, and glad to call him a friend. He has been he started his path down the money draining hobby 9 years ago. Money draining. I don't know if anybody ever goes on our website and reads the bios. I think mine needs to be updated a little bit. I think we're short a kid on there since the last time we did my bio. But I said that how I got into this was I told Andrea that we wouldn't have to buy beer or wine anymore. Well, we don't buy beer. I can't remember the last time we bought beer, but it hasn't saved us any money.
Right.
I still got to dial in wine, so she still has me buy wine. But if I can dial that one in, it'll be totally after grid.
Well, the excuse is, honey, we're not buying any more alcohol, right? You're just spending it all on honey, right?
Well, yeah, and then you got to upgrade your equipment. And geez, wouldn't the conical be great? Wouldn't the stainless be great?
Yeah, but look at it this way: we're not buying any more beer, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't remember the last time I bought beer. But,
so we must be saving.
Yeah. So back to our friend Paul. His roommate, 2010, came home with a wine making kit or some equipment, And little did he know that the poorly insulated house provided the best conditions for the Welch's grape juice. It turned out amazing on a first try. Yeah, I did try that once. I tried making a Concord grape wine. And I had to blend it, just blended the hell out of it to make it good. But because I've had Concord wine, it's pretty traditional on the Jewish side of things. They got the Concord wine with the different meals, but it's always sweet. It's always sweet. And I thought, oh well, I like dry Pinots. Maybe I'll just dry this Welch's out. That didn't go so well. Well, anyway, low and slow. It sounds like low and slow was the key to that one.
That's it.
A few batches later, a close friend suggested that he try mead. He'd never had it before, and the rocket fuel he produced was his first experience. Like JD said, you could sell that stuff to NASA, or, in a pinch, you just put it in the lawnmower.
Paul, we could have gotten rich, dude.
Yeah. After joining some Facebook forums, he started to produce some better meads, and in 2013 entered Mazer and took third place for an experimental sweet, which was his Port Piment. I think we're going to talk about his port later, because JD
Excellent.
also gets into port. So why don't we talk about your ports a little bit? He's got some medals, some trinkets, some honorable mentions, and everything in between. And he's now what we call respectable. He was also a founding board member of Valkyrie's Horn. And, he had a few good things up in the party suite. I think I remember...
yes, he did.
Kavik yeast that he fermented at 350 degrees in the oven. That took about 8 minutes to finish out, and was pretty tasty, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Paul, welcome to the show, and what's in your cup tonight?
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for a wonderful introduction. I'm temporarily out of a house and home here. I've been living with my in-laws, so I swung by my friends where I've been storing my meat, and I picked up what used to be a very farty rhubarb cider. Must have missed a feeding, or the temp maybe got a little bit too high. But with a couple months' time, the fartiness has dissipated, and it's a wonderful, probably about 6% ABV sparkling cider.
Very nice. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So you're out of house and home. You're building a new home. Is that correct?
I am.
And did you design a mead room in this home of yours?
So I pretty much gave my wife complete control except for the basement. Plans are to put in a commercial stainless steel sink, electrical output for, I'm thinking 3 to 4 years down the road, maybe an electric brewing system. And then my third stipulation was she would let me put out a booze garden out in the back.
Okay.
So, as in like a beer garden, or like you're going to grow things in the garden that are only for fermenting?
You know what? I do a beer from time to time, but most of my stuff is wine or meat. So it'd be mostly berries. I want to do some vines as well. I have been playing around with Minnesota wild grapes, or what is it, Vitis riparis. It's a riverbank grape. I want to do more experiments with that, and then also the U of M has a ton of vines that over the last decade they've really flourished with the varieties that they now provide for Zone 4. Being up here in the cold, I mean, you are limited, but thanks to the U of M, we've got a lot more to play around with.
I can see the gazebo out back, just overgrown with hops over the top of the roof, and then a walkway leading up to the gazebo that is, wine grapes on trellises.
My imagination is reeling right now, so yeah, I can't wait.
Oh my God, Paul, dude, I gotta come up there again. You're gonna keep this up? You're gonna make me come up there again?
Well, you know what? I would hold off for about 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, call me. Call me when it thaws out.
The local weather was already about a month ago had already stated that it's going to be another cold, snowy, and we had record lows, man. I don't even want to live in Minnesota anymore.
Jeez.
And I go ice fishing and go skiing and all that fun stuff, but too cold is too cold.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I was gonna say it's. We were talking the other week about freeze concentrating your juices before you ferment them, and you don't even need to use a freezer. You just set the bucket outside.
Now's the time, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Paul, why don't we just jump right into your port? Why don't you tell us what you're doing from the beginning?
Okay. Well, my wife and I were avid wine drinkers, and a few years before getting into mead making, I tried port for the first time. Fell in love with it. It's got that dark berry, hints of bananas in the flavor. Very complex wine. And has some residual sweetness, of course.
Yeah.
And it was just a nice nightcap, and wanted to replicate it, but do it in a mead style. So, obviously I couldn't think of any commercial port at the time. I don't think there was one available, or port piment at the time. And so I started coming up with recipes. One website that was very helpful was Jack Keller's.
Yep.
I believe his server went down, but some of his recipes are still available. One of them is the port. In fact, I just looked it up a couple of weeks ago. It's still available, and I pretty much based it off of that. And that was, Christ, the first time I made that was 2011. And every year I tweaked something a little bit different with it. It could be, I added some cherries in, maybe changed the grape, changed the yeast, changed the brandy. There's so many variations with it. It's, like I said, a very complex wine. I also toss in, I was using dried bananas, and then I started using real bananas and baking them, kind of like a bananas Foster's, to caramelize the bananas. So many avenues that you can go with it that I'm still finding ways to, change the variations today.
Did you stay with one grape variety, or did you try to mix it up at all, or how did you approach the grape side of things?
So up until about 2 years ago, I was using the same grape variety, Zinfandel. It's just a very hearty, complex grape. It's very dark red. It was a very, very, for most of the port recipes that I was looking up online, pretty much everyone had been using Zinfandel. So I didn't really experiment much past that grape until a couple of years ago. I started doing blends of Cabernet, Merlot.
Yep.
Kept the Zinfandel in there, obviously, was a great choice. It does add a lot of complexity by mixing other grapes in there, and it really does shine through, and it's noticeable. So now it's been a blend since up to a couple of years ago.
I don't have my notes in front of me, but I did 2 port style meads. One was a blackberry, I think it was blackberry cherry, and the other one's black currant and black plum. And I'm very pleased with the way they came out. In fact, 3 gallons of the plum and currant is sitting in an American oak barrel. Been in there now for almost a year.
Wow, that sounds delicious.
Yeah, the other one's still sitting in a carboy, the black cherry, and I'm sure it's ready to bottle now. It's, when you put yours together, I used a yeast. I want to say it was a Y yeast, very high gravity. It's like 18, 19% uh, yeast. And I was able to get it, push it right up to the 19%. Were you able to get that high with whatever you used? Were you able to get a good high ABV out of it?
Oh, yeah. The first time I did it, I got 18%, and I step fed it, so I could kind of guesstimate where I was. And then, obviously, when you fortify it, you add, a couple percentage points.
Right.
Usually with brandy. But, yeah, it was no problem getting most of my yeast up to that 18%. But I found that, around 18%, if I'm fermenting all the way, I was getting some hot aspects no matter how good my practices were. Yeah. So I've been dialing it down to about 16%, and then when I add the additional brandy, it's about a 18% when I fortify.
Mine, the two that I did came out right at 19%, and it's the kind of stuff where, you want to be sitting down when you drink it. Because,
time traveling.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's virtually no heat to it like you would get out of a, say, a Taylor Fladgate or a Graham's. You don't get that little tingling of that alcohol heat out of it. So it's very dangerous, but I love it. I mean, it really was yours. Mine was a literal workhorse. I mean, I really had to pay a lot of attention to it.
So, yeah, my starter, I pretty much doubled the usual amount that I work with. The last yeast I used was T73. I think it has a tolerance up to 16, 17%, if I recall, but, most yeast will go past that, if they're well fed, aerated, so on and so on. But, you said that you have something 19%. The great thing about these is, after a year or two, they stand the test of time. They have such a high ABV, and the sugar content makes them really good for aging.
Yeah, exactly. And I used a blend of wine, of grape juice. I used just the regular canned Alexander's, Zinfandel, Cab and Merlot in one, Zinfandel, Cab, and Petit Syrah in another. And I'm shame on me. I don't have my notes in front of me. But I was very pleased with how the grape juices really shone through. I also used some blackberry puree, and then the cherries were just I think it was a 10-pound bag of cherries that the frozen food section of the store. Just crushed them all up and set them in the fermenter for a while, the last part of fermentation and then first part of secondary, and was really very happy with the way it came out. Did you by chance were you at the Iron Bee? I don't recall.
Yes, I was.
Did you happen to get, because I brought several bottles of it up there, did you happen to get a taste of it at all?
I missed out on that one, and I regret that. That sounds delicious.
All right,
but maybe we can set up a trade. So,
you know what?
When mine's finished.
Ryan's got your information. I'll get Ryan to hook me up with your address and everything. I'm going to set you up with a bottle of each of my projects and make sure we get some up to you.
Definitely. You mentioned Alexander's, and actually, my 2013 third place was Alexander's concentrate. I used the Zinfandel concentrate for that.
There you go. Wow, outstanding.
So they make, and we do a big grape buy with most of the clubs here in that Minneapolis, St. Paul area. We do juice buys and grape buys during the fall, and most of the stuff that comes is actually Alexander's in juice and grape form from the same area.
Yeah. That's my next endeavor is to use the unadulterated. Alexander's is okay. I don't have any complaints, mind you. So this is not a hit on Alexander's, but I want to get my hands on some bona fide real grape juice, unconcentrated, just a straight up grape juice, and play around with that a little bit and see if I can't come up with a port, a port style mead. 13 pounds of honey in both of my projects is what it took. I used the wildflower that I have here at the house. So.
Yeah, I roughly used about the same, although in most recent years I've been dialing back, and I hate to say it, but sometimes if the ABV is too high or the starting gravity is too high, I'll add a little bit of water in, so dilute it out a little bit.
I remember getting mine started. Man, oh man, oh man. I mean, the initial gravity, the it wouldn't even read on the hydrometer. I dropped the hydrometer into the fermenter, and it wouldn't even, it wouldn't even register. So
pretty much just jumps right back out of the carboy as soon as you drop it in.
Yeah, I'm guessing somewhere around 1.170 or something ridiculous.
And basically, we got Polish meads down, don't we?
Oh my God! And it took some doings to finally get that thing going. Oh my God! What a project! But I'm glad yours turned out. Congratulations on the medal. And like I said, I'm going to get you a couple of bottles, hook you up with a couple of ones that I've done. Ryan.
JD, just put those in the next box you send to me.
There you go.
And then I'll hook up with Paul and have them just
poison check. Yeah, okay.
I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. Perfect.
Paul, I was getting a little bit of feedback, so I apologize if you said it, but did you mention what you were using to fortify that port mead?
Oh, yeah. So, you know what? At first, my first couple of batches, I think I was using E&J brandy. But, the more research I did on it, was looking up actual Portugal brandies. None of the liquor stores around me, or even in the Twin Cities, could I find a decent one. It usually was American brand name. So I did online searches for online liquor stores, and I found actual Portugal brandy and a couple websites on how to make ports mention this specific style of brandy. São Domingos, oh man, if I'm pronouncing that right, I might be slaughtering that name, but it's a Portugal brandy, very smooth, a wonderful grape neutral spirit. It tastes great out of the glass. No ice. It's just smooth.
Yeah.
Paul, how much brandy are you putting into these batches when you fortify? Is it? Do you have a specific quantity, or are you doing it by taste? How do you approach that?
So I'm doing it by taste. I used to do it by quantity, and I was doing it the old-fashioned way, back in the days. Obviously, they didn't have sulfites and sorbate, so they just keep pouring it in until they killed the fermentation, and that takes quite a bit of brandy.
Yep.
And, when I was doing my batches, my first couple of batches, I was pretty much just getting brandy wine. It was so potent with brandy. So I started adding sulfites and sorbates and doing it a more modern way. And then I was just doing brandy by taste. And I'll use now typically, half a liter to about 750.
Okay.
I'll put in half a liter knowing that it's not going to be overly brandyish. And then I add small increments up to 750. And usually that's my top off.
That's exactly what I've done. Yeah. So what I wind up with is a whole bottle of brandy or cognac. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that stuff is super expensive. So, I use ginger amounts compared to what I used to. So.
Good.
You know, Paul, you work at a hospital, right?
Yes. Yep, I'm an RN.
You know, so one of our former, I will get your take on this, because one of our former hosts, co-hosts, works in a hospital, and he always said that he was gonna. Well, I think it was. I mean, we were joking about it, of course, but he said, he didn't have a filtration system, so he was just gonna run his meat through a dialysis machine.
Yeah.
I could get my hands on one, but I don't know if I want to put my water through that, knowing how many bodies that's been through.
Yeah.
The thought would still be in my head, no matter how clean it was.
There you go.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
So you've played around with high temperature fermentation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Kveik, I don't know how you pronounce it.
Neither do we.
I think it's Kveik.
Yeah.
Anyway, I obviously that was a hot thing during the summer, no pun intended. And I was like, all right, you know what? Me, without being without a house and proper, fermentation, temperature control, I was like, great, this will be perfect. I can ask my buddy if I can brew in his garage, and he agreed to it. In fact, he did his first mead with mine, and we both did two different styles. He did the Hornindal, and I did the Voss. And I used California orange blossom honey. And man, a day and a half, and it was complete for fermentation. I was astounded. I was telling him, like, oh yeah, you're gonna need to, staggered nutrient addition, every day or whatever. You probably, And
Yeah.
boy, that was cut short. I mean, we gave it probably, a good feeding and a half, and it was complete. But we had a heat wave going through. It was 95 degrees ambient temp, but I bet you inside, wish we would have taken a temperature. Guarantee it was probably another 4 or 5 degrees hotter in there. But I was doing that. We had a beer dabbler, a local beer dabbler in my area, and they were allowing our homebrew club to serve for the first time. And I had less than 3 weeks to do a mead from start to finish, and I got it done with the Kveik. Got it cleared, carbonated it, back sweetened obviously too, and it turned out amazing. Ready to drink in less than 3 weeks.
Was that the one you had up there at Valkyrie's Horn there at the after party?
That is. That was the last of it. So we didn't tap my keg until halfway through, and it was almost gone. So I was able to get enough for a growler to bring to that.
That's like
that was the last of it.
That's like a one and done thing. You talk about the standard nutrient every other day alternative feeding thing. That Kveik thing is a one and done. You put it in all up in front, and it's done. I mean, 2 days later, you're done. You just have to double your, starter and double your nutrient additions, and like you said up front or whatever, and day and a half, 2 days, it's done. Yeah. I've been absolutely shocked at how good that yeast, and the results. I've never. In fact, I've tried the California ale yeast on just a straight honey mead. I've tried several different beeries. That Kveik thing, as far as I'm concerned, is like the best. It's the best. I think it produces
totally
the best.
Totally agree. The tropical fruit flavors you get from it, the higher it goes, the fruitier it gets. For a beginning mead maker that obviously doesn't have the temperature control, this is ideal.
Mm-hmm. It kind of blows that whole temperature control thing out of the window. I mean, where when I started out making mead, Paul, I had 0 temperature control. That was the rocket fuel days. Okay. That's where if I could have continued on, NASA wouldn't have had nothing. I mean, I'd had the best rocket fuel in the world. But then you start learning things, and so I went from filling an ice chest full of ice water, and trying to keep my fermenters cool to finally winding up with basically a hydroponics aquarium cooler for saltwater tanks. Basically, is what it is, or hydroponics cooler. It'll chill water down to like 38 degrees. And I have no problem circulating below 40-degree water through both of my my stainless steel fermenters. So I went down to that. So this whole thing, okay, spending the money on all this, from one iteration of cooling to the next.
Oh my gosh.
$300
if myself today could talk to myself back then and just slap the dickens out of myself.
If I knew Kavik had existed back then.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Oh. I'm guaranteed over $1,000 of useless equipment.
You think? Oh, my God.
Oh.
I love it.
I, too, did the swamp cooler as well, starting off, the ice in a bucket around, or basically wet some old T-shirts, throw them in the freezer, and wrap them around the carboy.
Yeah.
And then I got a Keyser, and serves a dual purpose.
Yeah, good. I want to switch gears here a little bit. You said you were drinking a rhubarb mead tonight.
Yeah.
And rhubarb is something. My grandmother used to make the best strawberry rhubarb pie. God bless her. And of course nobody knows where the hell the recipe's at today. But rhubarb, from everything that I've read, is a difficult. What is it? I guess a vegetable to work with. How were you able to accomplish, and what? There's different kinds of rhubarb out there, as I understand, as well.
Yep.
How did you accomplish your mead that you're drinking tonight? How did you put that together?
Well, I had some frozen rhubarb. That stuff holds up for quite a long time. It was probably 2-year-old rhubarb. I had about 4 gallons of diced up rhubarb in the back of my deep freeze. And before I moved, I'm like, oh boy, I got to do something with this. So I pulled that out, and luckily I also had some frozen cider from we do a group pressing every fall with our homebrew club, and everyone just brings in whatever apples they can find. So, the varieties are endless,
Yeah.
I couldn't even tell you what's in the cider, to be honest. A lot of crab apples, probably a lot of Honeycrisp, from Minnesota, I'm sure. But essentially, I knew that I had to have a lot of rhubarb in there. I had taken an honorable mention for my rhubarb at this year's, it's this year's Mazer's 2019 Mazer Cup.
Excellent.
Yep. So that, for a 5-gallon batch, I used about 6 gallons of frozen chopped diced rhubarb. I know that Josh Mahoney and a few others have actually juiced it. That is quite a tedious process. There's no way I tried juicing it, and I got maybe a quarter of a cup, and that consisted about a half hour, and me trying to strain rhubarb and not a juicer or whatever, but it just got plugged up every minute or two.
It's like juicing a celery stalk, right?
Pretty much, yes.
I got I used to have a juicer. We used to make fresh juice in the morning. One of the recipes called for celery stalk. I swear to God, I would just take the celery out and throw it in the trash. Anyway, go ahead.
Or put them in a Bloody Mary. Yeah, do whatever you want with them.
Go ahead.
But there's no way that I was gonna, end up juicing that much. So I figured, I'll just add more, and I added about maybe 2 gallons of water and probably about a gallon of honey or whatever into the must or whatever, and then I threw in that 6 gallons of frozen rhubarb. Well, there was a ton of water in there. I ended up with a little over 5 gallons of mixture when all said and done, and it was potent. Mouth puckering. Even with that sweetness.
Yeah.
I'm like, screw it, I'm going to ferment it anyway. We'll see how it turns out. And it got down to about 1.01, and it was just starting to die off. So I just threw it in my keezer and kind of just cut the fermentation early, stabilized it once it cleared, and I ended up back sweetening it quite a bit. I used orange blossom honey, and it was heaven. That tartness, it definitely faded a bit once it cleared out. And once it was super clear, I think it balanced out far better than when I had originally started with it.
Yeah.
So my advice to you, if you're doing rhubarb, thank God it's a weed and it's plentiful. Don't juice it, dice it up, and use a large quantity of it. Like you said, there are different varieties. I typically I use my mother's plant and one of her friends' plants. That's just ginormous. But she has I think it's Canada Red, and then there's a strawberry one. The strawberry one is a duller, less tart, but more like that baked rhubarb you get. That rhubarb crisp kind of dessert. So you definitely want to use, if you're just going to make it out of that one rhubarb, you definitely want to add a lot because it's more delicate rhubarb flavor with that typical variety.
Yeah. Paul, we are way past the first segment. If you want to stick around, we'd love to keep you here. I don't know what your schedule is like tonight. But if you want to stick around, we would be glad to have you.
Love to stay. My night's free.
Excellent. Very good. Ryan, I'm going to toss it back over to you guys.
Yeah, no, Paul, thanks for sticking around. I'm gonna put a pin in what I was about to say because I'm gonna give it over to Jeff, so Jeff can talk to us about one of his experiments. But I think you might have something to say as we get into this segment. We're gonna talk about I don't know, alternative might not be the right word, but different types of fermentation. But before we get into that, Jeff is going to talk a little bit about a pasteurization experiment that he is currently setting up. So, Jeff, why don't you take it from there?
Sure. So, the pasteurization experiment basically came about because I know there are a handful of people that are kind of what do I want to say? They're sensitive to things like sulfites and things like that, and usually the stabilization compounds that we recommend for mead, they're the metabisulfite and the sorbate. You guys know this. This is a well-known thing. There is some anecdotal what do I want to say? Talk that you can get some weird geranium flavors as the sorbate ages out, particularly with some of the, like if you get some malolactic going on or just in longer term aging, you kind of get this funky geranium flavor. And
so geranium flavor, is that like a caper?
Well, so the I don't know where to go with that, man.
Oh my!
Basically, what I understand with this is that if you're going to stabilize with sorbate, you're essentially putting a time limit on the amount of time you can just have your mead sit and age. And I've not experienced this with any of my meads. I'll say this off the bat, but I'd also seen some people messing around with pasteurizing instead of stabilizing. And so I decided to try this. I've got I had a 1 gallon batch of, it's a basic hibiscus mead, 14%, a lot of hibiscus up front, and then fermented dry. The other night I back sweetened it with enough honey to kind of make it It's somewhere between off dry and medium dry, just enough to kind of bring out some of that, some sugars to balance out the extreme tartness that comes with a lot of hibiscus. And then didn't stabilize or anything like that, but I had 10, 12-ounce bottles. I stuck those in a big container of water along with my Anova sous vide machine, and I set that guy for 165 degrees for 10 minutes, which is, I don't remember if it's 160 or 165, so I decided to play it safe and hit 165, but that's the recommendation for low temperature pasteurization of milk products from the, again, I can't remember if it's USDA or the FDA, but one of those two, food regulation organizations has this recommendation for milk, and I figured, well, if it's going to kill stuff in milk, it'll kill stuff in meat. These were all capped bottles, so the seal was good, and I kind of just let that go. One of the things I did is I started with room temperature tap water. I let it run at 165 for 10 minutes, and then I let it cool naturally so it didn't temperature shock the bottles or risk breakage that way. And right now I am doing a taste on this because one of the things I was a little bit worried about was, is that high temperature going to affect the quality of the meat? Am I going to taste, a cooked character? Or am I going to lose some of those aromatics and things like that from the high temperature? It's a sealed bottle. I would like to think no, but smelling it now, I still get a lot of hibiscus. I get a little bit of honey. Unfortunately, I was not smart enough to save one bottle for a comparative, so I'm going based on what I remember before I bottled. I don't think I'm losing much in terms of the smell, but it does smell a little subdued in terms of the character. And taste-wise, that tart hibiscus is definitely there. I'm still getting honey. Again, it would have been really useful to have a non-pasteurized one to compare, and I'll probably do that if I do this again, which I'm probably going to do again just for further trials.
Is this something that you could let sit a while? I mean, we all know that the honey character usually comes back after time. Mm-hmm. Is this something that you could let sit for a period and hope that honey character might come back a little stronger?
Well, that's the goal, and here's where I'm going with this next. There are a couple different things I want to do. I want to put a bottle in a warmer but not terribly warm situation. Like I might set it in a water bath for 100 degrees for like 16 hours. I might just set one on top of my water heater and see what that does. But I want to put it in a environment where if there is any yeast still alive, it'll come back and it'll start to work on some of these sugars. Or if there's any secondary infections, I don't think there should be. Followed good practice, sanitized everything, but just in case, this is the proof of concept of that pasteurization to make sure that it is effective and it is going to provide a valid, viable long-term storage solution. Other than that, I've got 9 other bottles that are ready to go and sit, and so this is going to be one of those things where I'm going to be, probably popping one open in a couple months and trying it. I'm going to have to check out that the one that's gone into a heated environment one way or the other and see how it performs, and kind of play this by ear and get more feedback. And I'll probably try this on at least one other batch, probably something with a more subtle flavor, because the hibiscus character, along with the honey, I'm wondering if that isn't giving me part of the jammy notes that I'm kind of imagining I may be getting on this, just because it is such a strong flavor, and it did require a fair bit of honey to get up to a decent level of that that medium sweetness.
I've heard of people pasteurizing beers in pressure cookers, and 9 times out of 10 winding up with like exploding bottles. I can't imagine. I mean, knowing what happens inside of a pressure cooker, I can't imagine putting a few bottles of beer inside one of these things and taking it up for,
That is part of the logic of starting with with room temperature water and letting it cool naturally. Because I'll tell you, it literally took about 2 hours to get this big. I want to say it was a 4 or 5 gallon mass of water up to 165 degrees from room temperature tap water, and then literally it finished up about, I want to say 11:30 one evening. I just let it sit and came back and drained it off the next morning. So I don't know how long it took to get back down to room temperature, but I just let it do that naturally. Another thing I'll mention is this is done with a still mead, so there is no like ambient pressure from carbonation in there, and so this is probably something worth trying with a carbonated mead as well, just to see if it is a viable option for that. Because another thing I was doing while I was waiting for that to come up to temperature was just looking to see if there were any leaks and if the bottle cap seal was going to hold with the pressure and things like that. So everything seemed to be just fine. I mean, it didn't have any water leaking in or any mead leaking out, any gases leaking out. So I think from early standards, this is a very viable option for people that don't want to chemically stabilize, or if you've got friends that have the sulfite sensitivities that cause really extreme headaches and things like that, it might be a good thing to explore. And it's a great time to do this as well, because we've got Thanksgiving and Black Friday coming up, and there are bound to be great deals on these Innova pressure cookers, which make this so ridiculously easy. So, if this is of interest to you, it's a good time to look into it.
Besides that Innova cooks a hell of a damn good steak too.
Yeah, I definitely use my Innova more for brewing than I do for cooking, but it does some very nice cooking work too.
Oh my God, dude! Put a New York in there with a little butter and garlic, and give it. I don't remember what the temperature, 135 degrees, whatever the hell it is, for an hour or whatever it was, and then just lightly sear it on a hot. I usually take like a cast iron frying pan and just get it as hot as I can get it. No oil, nothing, and just sear that thing on both sides. Oh, dude, you talk about a tender steak. Anyway, so Paul, in the medical field, this is a very viable. Now, I mean, we're not looking for any kind of expertise from you, because I know that can get into some dangerous territory. But from a medical perspective, I guess, this idea of pasteurization, taking the place of some of the metal bisulfites and things that, chemicals that people might have aversions to, a viable thing to do here?
Viable, yes. That sulfite allergy, though, it's a very, very rare condition. Very few people really have it. There's sulfites in everything, naturally, in fruit, vegetables, and everything, to a degree. To me, not so much as the sulfite allergy, as more as the sorbate alternative. Yeah. I think it's a viable option. But I do believe that there's some commercial meaderies experimenting with UV light rays or whatever to basically kill off bugs. That's another option. But to go back to the sorbate, I was looking into the sous vide, and that was one of the reasons why. But I was also going to use it for making starters. Control that temp at a perfect 104 degrees.
Yep.
But sorbate, for what I do, I always mark the date I buy it. It's usually has a shelf life up to a year, but I put a max at 6 months, and I don't bulk buy. That way, I'm circulating through my sorbate, and so it's not breaking down. I also sulfite, wait 12 hours, then add my sorbate. And I haven't had an issue in over 7-8 years.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Good stuff, Jeff. You continue on with that experiment and let us know how things turn out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always interested in what you're doing there in the Kansas City lab. the Mead House East Kansas City lab. So good stuff. Fermentation, guys. I don't know enough about this stuff really. I'm going to rely on Jeff and Ryan for the most part. Paul, if you want to chime in. I know Ryan has done this. What the hell do you call it, Ryan? This bacteria, something or other sour crap that
Brettanomyces?
you do. Something like that.
I've used different. Yeah, I've used Lacto,
Yeah.
Pedio, Brett. I've used a lot of those different ones.
Okay, here's the deal. All right, let's start right here. Me and a whole lot of other listeners out there probably don't know crap about this stuff. Okay, I want to know, what are the benefits? What does it take to get started? What kind of equipment do you need? Do you have to have separate equipment from? Because I've heard you talk about before about the cleanliness and keeping some instruments separate from, even fermenters separate from your, usual brewing equipment. So let me start with Ryan, Jeff. Let's start with your Bactos something or others, Bacillus something or other.
Sure. So there are different yeasts and some different bacteria that can provide that do different flavor profiles in your fermented beverages. First of all, talking about the equipment, you can go back and listen to our episode with the about sanitization and cleaning. That episode, we specifically asked about the experts if you needed, to have special equipment or what you should do there, and that episode had a lot of great information on it. Brett is most commonly found as a flaw. Like you don't clean well enough, and you're going to get a Brett. You're going to have Brett take over. You're going to get a Brett. Is going to get a hold of your beer, particularly, or your wine. It is a yeast. It's when you ferment with Brett alone, it goes really clean, actually, very clean. When you get some of the distinctive flavors that come from it, it's typically a mixed fermentation. So there was a Saccharomyces fermentation and then a Brett on top of it, and that's when the Brett gives you that traditional flavor.
What kind of flavors? What are you talking about here?
It can range from yeasty to musty to, some people say, ropey. It can have some different, depending on the strains you're using. Some people can get fruit out of it, like a cherry pie.
We're talking positive qualities here?
Maybe more barnyard.
We're talking about good quality.
Positive
yeah.
in depending on what you want.
Okay.
Belgian beers, if you drink Belgian beers, particularly the Abbey style beers,
I like those.
A lot of those are going to have there's going to be a level of Brett in them. And that is very distinctive of the style. And so it's not a flaw. If you're trying to make on the beer side, if you're trying to make a hazy IPA and you've got some Brett in there, it's probably going to be a flaw. Or if you've got, if you're entering a bottle of wine into a wine competition, Brett is absolutely considered a flaw, in that, by those standards. But it's again, it's different. It will dry things out. I guess I should say that. I should kind of end with this, but before I go down too much of a rabbit hole, it really will dry out a beverage, which is why it's used in that mixed fermentation, or why it can take hold even after a first primary fermentation has taken place. Let's just say you use a yeast that kind of peters out. So you're doing something like 1060 to 1010 or something in there, and at 1010 it kind of just stops. It's kind of where that yeast is going to end. If there's any Brett in there, whether deliberate or non-deliberate, that Brett could take it down to zero, or could take it down to 1002 or something like that, and really give you really take hold there. The other thing I'll say with Brett too that I've found, and that I've also experienced, is that Brett develops under pressure differently than it does not under pressure. So let's just say you want to do a mixed fermentation, or you don't, and it just happens, into your, let's just say you're making a braggot.
Yeah.
And it's in a carboy, and you've done a primary fermentation, or maybe just you did it with Brett or with a sack, and then you keep it, it's got the airlock on it, and the Brett's working on the airlock. That will definitely change the characteristics than if you say bottle condition with Brett in it, or once you cap it and you let that Brett, if the Brett's still active, working under pressure, it gets more intense under pressure. And I like it. That's what I've done here with this meat I'm doing now. It was kind of fermented under pressure. The Brett took hold under pressure. So I like that part of it. Some of the other ones, like they'll touch like the Lactobacillus and Pediococcus and some of those.
Yeah.
They don't have the ability necessarily to ferment on their own. They need to work with a yeast. They're really just kind of souring cultures, and they don't have a tolerance to hops. Hops again was used as a preservative,
right.
And so they can't take hold even at like 5 IBUs. Kind of goes out. So,
Okay.
a lot of times those are used today in kettle sours. So you make up your wort or your must, and you introduce those and drop the pH, and then do your boil if you're doing like a braggot, like a kettle sour braggot, and then you do your boil, and then ferment after that with that now more kind of soured wort. But it's interesting. I'll tell you that the Brett in particular, I want to go back to that for just one more second. Once you introduce it, you need to either take really good care that it's now in your brewing space, and you need ultra sanitation and be really careful, or else it's going to be in every batch you make. Or you just don't care and you say, okay,
that's what I'm doing from now on, right?
Now everything I do is going to have a little bit of Brett in it.
Yeah. Okay.
Which some people don't care about. Some people just don't care about it. But it once you introduce some of this stuff, it's very difficult to get rid of. Unless you're doing very, very good, sanitization.
So it might pay off to have two different sets of brewing equipment than to keep things kind of on the safe side.
Possibly even two different rooms for brewing. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you go back to that episode, more important than the two different sets of equipment is the two different kind of spaces you're in. Frankly, because you got stainless steel fermenter, no problem. You can sanitize that. You don't have to worry about your equipment getting cross-contaminated. But it gets into the air. It gets on everything. Frankly, every grain room in every homebrew shop has Brett in there and on it.
Yeah.
And probably other different, souring bacteria as well.
Lacto is very common on grain as well. Yeah, It's there.
So, Jeff, there's, besides the Brett type fermentation, there's also several others, probably more than several.
Sure. Brett is kind of the unique one in this one because it's another form of yeast. A lot of the other microflora that you see used in these kind of applications are all bacterial. So, Pediococcus, Lactobacillus, stuff that Ryan has mentioned. And, to go back to using these effectively without contaminating other brews, this is part of the reason kettle sours are so popular, because you can kettle sour a batch. Basically, you make a wort, you add your bacteria, and you let that go. You let that go for, it might be a few hours, it might be a day or two, at a somewhat warm temperature. The bacteria does its thing and converts some of those malt sugars into lactic acid, or whatever mechanism they're using to sour, and then you bring it up to a boil and you kill all those guys. It's effective because it severely limits the possibility of contamination, where the bacteria form spores that go airborne and get into everything else. There's a reason people are using that as opposed to a long-term, kind of funky ferment of different bacterial cells, just because it is easier to control that way. That said, I've not done a lot of intentional work with alternative, stuff like Ryan has with the Brett, things like that. It's kind of one of those things that I have been eyeballing, but never really jumped into, just because of the extra care required to do it. So I had an accidental one from a couple years back that got some form of bacteria into it. I have no idea which, and it turned out actually fairly nice, but that's not something I've intentionally replicated either.
Well, talking from the mead, from the mead world, I mean, whatever applications there may be there, some of these other, different forms of fermentation. Is there an advantage there somewhere? I mean, are we talking something that's worth doing? I guess it's to each his own.
I'll give you, if you like lambics particularly. So here's what I suggest to you: go to the liquor store and buy a good Belgian lambic.
Yeah.
And drink it. And if you like it, then it's something that's worth doing. The other one would be you can get kettle sours, a dime a dozen, and frankly, to me, and I'm probably going to get, probably increase our caseload on hate mail for saying this, but most kettle sours to me just taste like sweet tarts. There's not a lot of depth. There's not a lot of complexity. It's tart. It's sweet, and that's it. They usually throw some fruit in there, and there's not much more to it. But if you like a good Belgian lambic, and there are some kind of more mass imported ones, but there are some really good ones out there that are a little more obscure. So if your liquor store's got a good beer guy or a good Belgian beer guy, talk to them. These are made in the kind of, one of the traditional styles of doing it is they age them for years.
Yeah.
And while all those things are working, particularly the bacterias, and then they blend 3-year-old, 2-year-old, and 1-year-old, and maybe some fresh stuff, and maybe older together, and until like a winemaker gets the blend that they like. I had one that was not blended, but was made by a guy here who spends a lot of time in Belgium, that he made a 7-year-old lambic, and it was delicious. It was, extremely distinctive. I mean, very polarizing. Like you either really appreciated it, or you thought that they accidentally served you bathroom cleaner. But so but if you like it, then it's definitely worthwhile. If you don't care for it, then you don't worry about it. I mean, it's kind of like I say to people when they ask me, hey, what's a good mead? What's the best mead to try that can, or what's whatever, whether that they said mead or wine or beer, whatever, and they say, look, the one that you like the most is the best one that I have, or that the liquor store has, or the bar has. Yeah. So I mean, one thing I wish that I could really hammer home with people is don't chase trends. Don't become a fanboy or a fangirl at chasing trends.
Yeah.
Find out what you like and then brew that and drink that and buy that.
Has Paul, are the wheels turning, or have you been down this road already?
I have not started at all, and nor do I want to. But I have been trading my barrels, my used barrels, to a very experienced beer maker, a beer brewer, and he's given me some of his stuff that he's made out of the barrels, and it's been delicious. So I don't want to contaminate any brand new equipment, and I'll leave it to someone else.
There's always something to drinking somebody else's stuff, huh?
I can always trade.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, man. All right. Hey, let's move on. I think we got time for maybe a couple of Facebook friends, and maybe we can get Paul involved in a couple of these. Paul has been in the mead making world actually in the fermentation world for some time now. So maybe we can get his expertise on this as well. Facebook friends, of course, this is where we try to answer questions with no formal expertise other than what we've experienced in our own brew house, because none of us are experts. Jeff, you always got something really interesting out of Reddit. Have you got something for us tonight?
Sure, and this seems like a simple question, but I think we can address this with a little bit of depth here. The user's name is Runyop, RUNYOP. Sorry, RUNEYOP. He asks, how do you get a longer, more intense finish in your meads? Says he just opened up a light Bochet with an ABV of 12.5%. Nose and palate are pretty good, but the finish is really short and underwhelming. How do you fix that?
Haven't the slightest. Say that again. He opened up a 12% ABV.
Yep, it's a 12.5% Bochet, so it's caramelized honey.
Yeah.
He says the nose and the palate are both pretty good, but the finish is just really short and leaves something to be desired. It's underwhelming, he says.
Be nice to know what he means by that.
As it doesn't linger, or was it
think so.
Good to begin with? Was it good to begin with?
He says it's good on the palate, so I'm assuming.
Okay.
The flavor is where he wants it, but it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't linger. Maybe it just kind of it finishes on an odd note. It is a little obscure, and that. Granted, yes.
Well, so
maybe
if we kind of try to get to what we're trying to solve for here. He's basically saying he's got a nice tasting mead, good mouthfeel, nice taste, but that the aroma isn't there for him. That the kind of an accurate summary.
Well, the aroma was okay. He says
finish,
the nose was good.
Yeah, he's
it's
talking
the
about
finish.
the finish. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if, like, Paul was saying, if it's kind of just flabby or if it doesn't linger right, or what exactly he's looking for, but it sounds like the finish / the aftertaste is really what he's going for as an improvement.
Paul, I wonder if he's talking about some kind of an acrid aftertaste after burning the honey.
So the only Bochets that I ever make are usually in a crock pot. I like that caramel apple flavor personally. And when I'm back sweetening, I will actually use raw honey along with some, bochet honey as well. So you do get a little bit of that floral sense too as well brought back. My personal taste.
Yeah. Ryan, what do you think? I'm thinking he's talking about maybe some kind of an acrid. I mean, we don't know how he caramelizes honey, but I've heard people describe some of the aftertastes as being kind of acrid and have that over a charcoal fire,
a little sharp, a little ashy.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think you got to ask yourself a couple things here. And I could do a whole segment, on this in the future maybe, but when do you stop with your meads? When is it done? I mean, where do you do the adjustments? If he's talking about pulling a sample out of the carboy, then there's things that you could do. I mean, he could stabilize it and back sweeten it with some raw honey or some uncaramelized honey, or he could maybe add some other kind of adjunct to it. When it's in the bottle and you're tasting it out of the bottle or the keg and it's not quite there, you've got to kind of decide on what you want to do at that point. Do you want to unbottle everything, or do you want to try to find a different kind of a solution, or how do you want to consume it? And we can talk about all that. Maybe we'll do that for a segment next week, because I've got some opinions on that. But the number one thing to do here is document. Make sure that you documented your process and what you did that led you to this final product, and then start thinking about what are the adjustments that you can make for your next batch, so that it's more pleasing to you.
Yeah, good stuff. All right,
I think that's a good approach. Yeah, you want to have the option, the ability to learn from what you did this time and do it better next time.
Yeah, I think so. Let's leave that one right there then. We've got time for one more, Ryan. You got a real quick one here?
Yeah, a quick one here. Listener, he said that he's been deep in the brewing, mead making world for quite some time, and has kind of developed a pretty complex vernacular. So, for example, I talked about how sometimes bread can be described as ropey or a horse blanket or something like that. And he wants to be able to communicate with lay drinkers or people that aren't quite, as in that level of using some of that same vocabulary, and how best to describe the beverages that most people can understand it. And Epstein didn't kill himself. I don't know why he put that on there.
When I'm kind of, you get to know me, I guess. Brian and Jeff pretty much know me pretty well. When I taste things, it's either good or it isn't. I mean, it either is or it isn't. There's no middle ground with me. I either like it or I don't like it. And my taste buds are my own. And I think that's something that you have to develop over time. Either you're going to like what you're drinking or you're not going to like it, period. Vernaculars, I mean, if you're looking for descriptors, is that really that important? I guess if you're trying to describe something to somebody else, maybe so. But if I'm drinking something and I don't like it, I'm not going to finish it, period. That's the end of it. I mean, it's done. I learned more about my bourbons. I came to enjoy some bourbons that I had not enjoyed before. And listening to one of my good friends, Chris Trevino, a liquor hound over on YouTube, check him out. I learned a lot from him, just in the bourbon world, and not just the bourbon, but the Scotch, the tequila, and thinking about some of the things, the descriptors and things that he came up with. And that's one side, okay. But when it all comes down to my taste buds, like I said, I'm either gonna like it or I'm not. Okay, it's that simple for me. And let's move on to Paul. Paul, what's your take on this?
I'm kind of with you on whether I there's very little gray area, and it's kind of just black and white. I love it or hate it. When I'm judging meads or whatever, I come up with the final score, and then I just kind of base it off of that. I couldn't agree more with you, JD. I'm kind of siding with you. I don't know how much I can elaborate on that.
Yeah, that's fine. Jeff, what's your take?
So let's roll back to your. You mentioned Chris from Liquor Hound.
Yeah.
When he was on the show with us, he was talking about that flavor wheel.
Yeah.
And we had all those the broad categories and like the subsets and things like that. If you look, there's honey flavor wheels, there's beer flavor wheels. Look at some of those sometime. When I'm talking to people that are not necessarily like, they may not have such a sensitive palate, or they may be kind of new to beer or wine or something like that. Generally, I try to focus on those broader categories. Like, let's say, for example, I'm having some beers and I'm trying to find something that somebody's going to like. I'll say, well, do you like more hoppy? Do you like more fruity? Do you like more malty? Do you like sweet? Do you like, a roasty kind of character? Those general terms are generally a great way to start to narrow things down for people. And they're really approachable generally, because if I tell you, yeah, this tastes kind of roasty, you have a pretty good sense of what that's going to be. Or this is kind of malty. That might be a little bit more obscure, but you kind of get the idea. Versus, well, this has a kind of a leathery character with some tobacco notes and black pepper. You kind of see people's eyes glaze over when you throw all that at them.
Yeah. I started out the show talking about what I was drinking tonight. One of them was this Old Forester 1910, and I told you it was, it's the typical, it's the brown sugar. It's got a very rich brown sugar. Caramel comes in a little bit past that, a little bit of vanilla towards the end. It finishes a little bit on the dry side. It's very smooth. Okay, and that honestly, if you like bourbon, that's probably all you need to know. I can go a lot deeper than that. I could tell you about the old leather bookcase, or or an old leather chair, or the cigar smoke that I get out of it as well, and go a lot deeper than that. But really, is that important? Is that really important?
Well, I'd say there's two different ways that I think you can go with a neophyte, and a lot of the times I think we end up crossing that line. We end up taking a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, and we end up putting them together, and that's what confuses people. Now I'm going to take a step back. What is column A and what is column B? Column A is simply saying what it tastes like in common everyday terms. You'll often find this with most wines. Oh, I get some pear, I get lemon, I get raspberry, I get orange marmalade. So it's very bare, or I don't want to say bare bones, but it's very basic on what it tastes like. I mean, next time you're at the liquor store or you see a wine that has flavor notes, I mean, this is very common of what you might see. Again, it pear, honeysuckle, lemon, things like that. Very, very simple. You can do that because most people know what a pear is like, and lemon is like, or melon is like, or raspberry. You're going to get that. The other side of it is more what I call emotional or emotive. And that's where you say things like leather and old bookshelf or tobacco or cigar smoke. People know what those things make them feel like more than what they taste like because they have more of an emotional connection. So if I smell pipe tobacco, yes, I know what it smells like, but pipe tobacco brings more of an emotional response to me than just the basic lemon. So you say lemon to me, I just think of what a lemon is like. I don't might not have the same amount of emotional connections to a lemon than to pipe tobacco. And so a lot of times when we're talking, we're going to say, oh, it's got orange marmalade and pipe tobacco and leather and horse blanket or something. I mean, that'd be really weird. And no, that's not the next MVP challenge, by the way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But you say that, and all of a sudden you're crossing these lines to people. You're saying, well, something very basic like orange marmalade and lemon, but then something much more emotionally connected, like pipe tobacco and leather and things like that. And so I think that when you're talking to a neophyte or somebody that's brand new to this world, try to stay in one lane or the other. Yep. Now the wine world is very much on the A column. Just again, here's the things that what they taste like, and this is what this wine is going to taste like.
Yeah.
Or you could go the other direction and just tell them what it's going to make them feel like. It's going to make you feel like in an old leather club chair with pipe tobacco and with old paper, like library books and things like that. It's going to bring you into that setting.
Exactly.
So I'd go to again, to one side or the other with somebody new, and then as you'll develop, you can start to kind of cross those columns a little bit. But yeah, that's I think that's a good bow on that question.
There you go. I tell you what, and we are going to leave it right there. Hey, thanks for listening and for hanging out with us here in this episode. And hey, special thanks to our guest, Paul Johnson, medal-winning home mead maker, for hanging out all night with us. Paul, enjoyed having you on the show tonight, and would love to have you back again.
Yeah, would love to come back again. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Hey, don't forget, let us know what you're brewing. We might even give you a call. Email us, info@themeadhouse.com, or send us a message on Facebook or Twitter, both at The Mead House. Hey, in the meantime, happy mead making. That's it for this episode. Ryan, flip the lights off. Jeff, slam the door shut. Paul, you can slam the gate shut. We'll be back next week with episode number 144 of The Mead House. We're gone.